Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. Today is Friday, the 13th of May, 2022. These are the stories that will be under discussion during the course of the show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the 79th day of the conflict in Ukraine. We'll be talking about the different aspects of this current conflict that is not only engulfing Russia and Ukraine, but also the West. Whether on the one hand, there are talks of oil sanctions by the European Union on Russia, on the other hand, we have Russia that says that the sanctions are going to hurt the West more than it. At the same time, we also hear of incursions within Ukraine by the Russian forces. We hear of the casualties of these incursions, and we also hear of the Ukrainian different statements that have been coming out from the Ukrainian President Zelensky or the others as far as what the West needs to do in order to curtail Russia. This is going to be our first segment. Our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the IPHRC, or the Independent Human Rights Commission of the OIC, that is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, that has today strongly condemned the Indian government's recent delimitation of electoral constituencies in the Indian illegal occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It terms it as a violation of the OIC and the United Nations Security Council resolutions. At the same time, the spokesperson of the Foreign Office, Mr. Asim Iftikhar, also has said that Pakistan wants good relations with India, but for that, India first needs to let Kashmiris decide their fate. And we are talking of the right to self-determination here. The Foreign Office also said that doors for diplomacy on outstanding disputes with India remained open, but that there needed to be an environment for a constructive dialogue that was lacking. This is going to be our second story. Then we'll be talking about the President of the United Arab Emirates and the ruler of Abu Dhabi, Excellency Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who has passed away today at the age of 73. 40 days of mourning have been announced by the U.A.E. government on his sad demise. And of course, Pakistan also sends its deepest and most profound condolences on a friend of Pakistan, His Excellency Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan. Then we'll be talking about Pakistani lawyer and activist Tahira Hassan, who has received the Commonwealth Points of Lights Award for her effort promoting the well-being of orphaned, abandoned and stateless children. This award, that is the Point of Lights Award, is given to outstanding individual volunteers who make a positive change for the community. And of course, she joins the ranks of many others like Idi Saab, Bilkis Idi and others. Let's begin with our first segment, and that concerns the 79th day of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, which is no longer, in fact, a conflict between Ukraine and Russia and has gone much beyond. Many statements emanating from both sides, still the incursion and the conflict remains. More in the following report.
In a world marred by economic meltdown, poverty, famine, xenophobic and far-right political doctrines, emergence of war hysteria depicts the most dangerous phenomenon of contemporary world. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is sending ripple effects across the world owing to complex interdependence of world economic order. Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that the West had triggered a global economic crisis and a wave of ruinous inflation by imposing on Russia the most severe sanctions in recent history over a conflict in Ukraine. Russia sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine on February 24th in a special military operation, prompting United States and its allies to impose sweeping sanctions on Russia and the Russian elite, measures termed by Kremlin as a declaration of economic war. World Bank has lowered growth forecast of whole South Asian region, citing worsening supply bottlenecks and rising inflation risks caused by the Ukraine crisis. Earlier, the Washington-based lender World Bank has downgraded its economic outlook for East Asia and the Pacific in the recent report, citing rising inflation in the United States and slowing growth in China as risks to the region's growth. The International Monetary Fund speculated that Ukraine war may fundamentally alter the global economic order. Underscoring gravity of the situation, the United Nations Food Chief David Beasley warned that Ukraine war has created a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe, will have a global impact beyond anything we've seen since the World War II. In order to avoid massive disruption of global economy, famine, destabilization, and humanitarian crisis, dialogue and diplomacy must be accorded primacy.
Now, to discuss this very important topic and of course the different issues that have combined with this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, we've been joined by Syed Muhammad Ali. He is a security expert and analyst. Thank you very much, Ali, to have joined us. Ali, when we look at the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, is it a political conflict? Is it an economic conflict, or is there more to it?
I think it's all of that and more to it. I think if you look at this conflict which has entered its third month, unlike the initial expectations that Russia will immediately sweep and control and secure by virtue of its very large and heavily armed forces, have proven the pundits wrong. They have made significant gains. They have inflicted significant damage on the Ukrainian forces, but they have not been able to convert it into a political victory, into a diplomatic victory.
Why is that? Because of the help and assistance of the West, of the European Union, or is there more to it?
Absolutely, there is more to it. Because while Russia has made significant gains on the ground, but it is still very far from controlling the territory of Ukraine. And according to some reports, it has used more missiles in the last 79 days than US used in Afghanistan.
All right.
There are not many imports coming out of it. But the nature of war is different, Omar. That is what I need to explain. There were initial expectations that it will use air power and it will send in its armored columns and they will completely bring about a regime change and declare victory, which didn't happen.
But weaponization of the countries is happening.
Yes, yes, that's what I'm coming to. The nature of war is very different, and it has surprised and frustrated the Russian military as well. Because unlike initial expectations, the Ukrainian forces, supported by non-state actors from around the world, and also the military reinforcements being sent by NATO and the US, have galvanized support, and they have put up quite a fight, and they are being supported through thousands of anti-tank missiles, surface-to-air missiles, and so it has made it into a very difficult urban warfare, which a typical military may not be trained or ready for. So the nature of war is different, one. Secondly, there have been some major surprises. One of the lead ships of the Black Sea Russian fleet was sunk recently.
Although there are no reports of casualties so far.
Yes, but it was one of the lead ships, one of the flagships, and one of the most heavily armed cruisers, which had almost 3 layers of air defense systems on it, and it was sunk after hit by 2 missiles. So there have been some shocks and surprises. Also, there are other dimensions to it. Notwithstanding the kinetic or operational dimension of warfare on the ground, this conflict is playing out, as you rightly pointed out in your initial comments, in the diplomatic domain, in the legal domain, in the houses of United Nations Human Rights Council, in media, and also in terms of economic warfare. What the West is trying to do is to make this war very painful and costly for Russia economically, politically, psychologically, and diplomatically.
Is Russia ready for it, by the way?
That's the key question, Omar. That whatever limited territorial gains Russian forces have made so far, can the Russian leadership and nation afford the diplomatic, legal, political, and economic cost? Because these costs, Umar, may not be temporary. The military gains are temporary. Because I was part of an international conference recently in which Russian and Chinese experts were also there, and I asked the Russian expert that even if they physically control and capture, which they have not done, entire territory of Ukraine, they lack the diplomatic clout to convert this physical victory into a diplomatic victory at the United Nations Security Council, because there are 4 countries which will not accept it as an expansion. Since 1945, the entire edifice of international politics, Omar, is anchored on United Nations Security Council. I'll give you just 3 examples: Vietnam War, Afghanistan War, Iraq War. US practically controlled these countries when they were there through hard power, but they could not conquer them they could not retain them or make them a part of their territory. The territorial wars have become obsolete with the emergence of the UN system, because even if you physically conquer a country, you cannot declare it as part of your country internationally.
Herein comes a very important question. Is the United Nations Security Council or the United Nations as an organization as valuable, as important, as tangible as it was a couple of decades back?
I think it's a profound question, because it is useful to have United Nations Security Council to prevent the great powers from engaging in a direct conflict. They have successfully prevented another world war, which can destroy the whole world, especially after the advent of the nuclear weapons. It is an overarching common concern and interest of the entire humanity. However, the expectation that they will resolve conflicts, they will resolve disputes, whether it's Palestine, Kashmir or anywhere else, have proven to be not unrealistic expectations thus far. So the developing world's concerns and expectations have not been fulfilled, but it has successfully prevented a direct conflict between great powers, which could engulf the entire world. That was the concern. That continues to be the concern, that this war as well can escalate further. And Russia is signaling that if pushed further, it might resort to greater escalation means. But still, I think there is a conscious effort in Washington and Moscow both, that direct confrontation must be avoided to prevent this emerging and escalating into a world war.
Now, speaking of measures to de-escalate the tension between Ukraine and Russia, we hear about the peace talks. We've had 2 rounds of talks between Ukraine and Russia. The Ukrainian side still talks about peace talks and that it is ready, but it is not willing to accept Crimea and other points of disinterest as far as Ukraine is concerned. Will peace overtures between the two countries work in the short term or in the long term?
Not in the short term. Why? For the simple reason that Russian, American and Ukrainian strategic interests are not identical. US wants, as an independent analyst, US wants this war to go on because it translates into draining the Russian might, embarrassing it before the world and its own population, that it is not successfully achieving its war goals, and it is exhausting its military might, it's wasting its hard power. So it is useful strategically for the US. But it also wants to use Ukraine to be exploited in engaging and confronting Russia rather than doing it directly. So from a realist point of view, this suits US, although and Russia is also to some extent frustrated because its war objectives have not completely materialized in the short term, and it has also heavily costed in terms of its energy revenue towards the European market, and also the sanction regime that is evolving, that the US is likely to develop and impose in the long term. So the cost of this war for the Russian economy and nation may not be restricted in the short term. The sanction regime will affect other countries.
But the cost of this incursion will also affect the European Union, especially when it comes to gas and oil.
Absolutely.
Won't it be also a long-term effect of this incursion?
You know Europe well, Omar, and I think it is also a very significant event in the history of European politics, because Russia has succeeded in this war in exposing the limits of US security commitment towards Western Europe. And European countries are really baffled by this security dilemma, that can they trust US to protect its security interests against the might of Russia, or should they threaten Russia on behalf of the US, at the cost of their own security interests, or should they reduce hostility with Moscow in order to have a European vision for the security architecture in future, which does not depend on the US. So these dynamics are very complex, and I think it's not going to be a clean victory or a clean peace. It will transform the world order. Even China is not very happy with this war, because it considers in the emerging world order an exhausted and entangled Russia as harmful to its own national interests. But it also suits China, contrastingly, in the context that it has distracted US hard power away from the Indo-Pacific strategy, which largely focused on concentrating the might of US hard power against China in the Asia-Pacific region. Now the US will be forced to simultaneously distribute its hard power and develop a posture which is equally focused towards China as well as Europe against Russia.
Last question, two parts. First part, we know of the impact, the economic impact of it as far as food security is concerned, as far as oil and gas are concerned. Will the world, you talk about a change in the world order, will the world economic order also change, or has already changed as a result of this incursion? And secondly, the whole issue began with NATO and Ukraine being part of NATO. Now that we see countries such as Finland and Sweden also applying for NATO membership, and they have the pat on the back by the United States, is that going to further strengthen NATO as an organization, and the look east policy of NATO, is that going to continue as well?
I think that's a very important question. I think this conflict has shown the limits of US security commitment towards Europe, but it has also shown to Europe that US remains the hyperpower. It has 42% of the entire world's defense spending. It continues to dominate the world in terms of hard power, both quantitatively and qualitatively. And no country is willing to directly challenge the US military supremacy in the world. Although there are challenges in the diplomatic domain, psychological domain, in media and other things, there is no direct challenge. Even China, and I've talked to Chinese experts on this conflict, they are really worried because the economic impact of the Ukraine war will hurt Chinese rise as well, because if all the Russian companies come under US sanction regime, then China may not be able to do business with those companies and also continue to benefit from its largest export market, which is US. We could not import oil from Iran because it was under the sanctions regime from the US. Similarly, if a heavier, more punishing economic regime is imposed by the West on Russia, then it will reduce Pakistan's ability to do energy cooperation with them, because US continues to be our largest export market as well. They have leverage in IMF and World Bank as well, which we cannot ignore. Similarly, China sees US as its largest export market, $700 to $800 billion it earns every year. So it cannot risk that. I'm quoting directly the Chinese experts. They cannot risk that for supporting Russia in the hope of confronting US. So they, in a nutshell, Beijing considers this conflict as not very well timed, because it will affect the Chinese rise and its ability to actually also do cooperation with Russia and US at the same time, because it will expand, deepen and accelerate the polarization of the world order.
Speaking of acceleration, very short answer, NATO. What kind of future do you see for this organization? I
think NATO has a challenge. I probably recall once I said on your program, one of its founders said something very simply, that its objectives were threefold: keep the Russians out, Germans down and Americans in, and that seems to be timeless. However, I think there is a realization in Europe that they need to find European solutions to European security challenges, rather than either provoking or confronting Russia or depending heavily on the US. Because the multipolarization of the world order will reduce their ability to completely trust Washington and completely provoke Russia at the same time. And the evidence of that is now they are looking for indigenous defense projects within Europe, which are not heavily dependent on US cooperation.
So at the end of the day, we are going to see more of bloc politics coming out in the open, whether it be the European Union standing as one, whether it be the East becoming one bloc, or whether it be the US making blocs with other countries that it considers very important. We see the Indo-Pacific strategy also that the USA is putting into place, and the World Bank downgrades the outlook for East Asia. So of course there is a huge economic impact of this
I think very quickly, the two or very important dimensions relevant for Pakistan are the food security and energy security as well, because we expected some cooperation from Russia that might be affected after this because of the US sanction regime. Secondly, Russia and Ukraine both are one of the largest exporters of wheat, and Pakistan also imports wheat from them. So the wheat prices are heavily going to affect the world food prices.
Of course. So the world, it's not just going to affect the European Union or Russia or Ukraine or some countries in the East, but it's going to affect the world as a whole, economically, politically, and in so many other ways as well. Thank you very much, Syed Muhammad Ali, security expert, to have joined us and to have talked to us in detail on the different aspects of this current crisis that has entered its 79th day, ladies and gentlemen, the Ukrainian conflict, and it doesn't seem to go away anytime soon, as per what we are seeing in front of our eyes on every single passing day. There's something new that is happening. Let's come to our second story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the Independent Human Rights Commission of the OIC that has today condemned the recent delimitation of the electoral constituencies by Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir Authority. What kind of repercussions is this going to have? Is this going to put more pressure on India? More in the following report.
The peace of South Asia has long been held hostage owing to Indian hegemonic designs which dangerously imperil regional peace. Indian malicious designs to alter the religious and demographic composition of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir are vividly clear. Exhibiting its imperial designs, the Jammu and Kashmir Delimitation Commission added 6 new assembly seats for the Jammu region and 1 for Kashmir in its infamous Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir Delimitation Commission report. Pakistan already conveyed to Indian side that this entire exercise was farcical and had already been rejected by the cross-section of political parties in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Organization of Islamic Cooperation has strongly condemned the Indian government's recent delimitation of electoral constituency in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, terming it as a violation of OIC and United Nations Security Council resolutions. Narendra Modi's government broke up Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir into 2 federal territories in 2019 as a part of a move to tighten its grip over the disputed region. Under the garb of so-called delimitation, the representation of Muslims in the redesignated constituencies had been reduced to their disadvantage. Pakistan, as a torchbearer of peace, always accorded due importance to diplomacy, and Foreign Office noted that doors for diplomacy on outstanding disputes with India remain open, and Pakistan seeks peaceful settlement of disputes with India.
Now, to discuss this very important issue, that is the delimitation within Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, our relations with India as well, and the future, any future, and what are the conditions that are associated with that. We've been joined by the spokesperson of the Foreign Office, Mr. Asim Iftikhar. Ahmed Saab, thank you very much, sir, to have joined us. First of all, sir, I'd like to begin with the tangent of relationship between Pakistan and India. You yesterday on questions on ties with India at your briefing said in diplomacy, you can never shut the doors. I understand that, but do you feel there are certain conditions that are associated with opening the doors with India?
Yes, we do continue to have diplomatic relations with India. You must recall this, keep this in mind. There are embassies on both sides, although, at a lower level, the high commissioners are not there. But at the functional level and at reduced strength, the diplomatic missions are working, and there are some activities which, continue to take place. Having said that, I think at the larger plane, what happened in August 2019, specifically with regard to the unilateral and illegal actions that India took in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and all the subsequent steps that they have taken since then. These are all violations of UN Security Council resolutions on Kashmir. These are in stark violation of international law, and they are also in stark violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. So this is the state of affairs that is there in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. There is a reign of terror. The brutalities have reached a new height, and these are the kind of environment in which obviously no constructive dialogue can take place. And this is exactly what we are saying. We want and we wish friendly and peaceful relations with all neighbors, including with India. But in this kind of environment in which there are continuing and widespread human rights violations in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and India continues to take illegal and unilateral actions with the view to changing the demographic composition of the occupied territory. And as I said, again, this is in complete violation of UN Security Council resolutions and the Fourth Geneva Convention. This is not the kind of environment in which a constructive and result-oriented dialogue can take place.
Sir, recently there have been also the electoral constituencies delimitation cases that have been brought forward. The Indian side of the way it wants to move forward as far as Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. No hidden secret there. Nevertheless, there has been now an open condemnation by the OIC, by the IPHRC, that is a sub group of the OIC. Do you feel that is going to exert some kind of pressure on India, or do you feel that India will continue unabated as far as what it is perpetrating in the Held Valley, despite the different statements, and of course the condemnation that is coming worldwide as far as its actions are concerned?
Whatever India might be doing, it has no legitimacy and credibility whatsoever. I mean, these steps, no international organization, the UN, from the UN to OIC, no international organization has ever accepted or given any kind of legitimacy or acceptance to such kind of actions, because, as I said, they are in violation of international law. And India continues to take these steps, which is a clear indication that, it is proceeding according to a plan, and that was to bring about the demographic changes in the occupied territory. And this is evident from the recommendations of the report of the so-called Delimitation Commission, where, they have given, it's a lopsided arrangement that they have come up with. They've given more additional seats to Jammu as compared to Kashmir, despite the fact that the population of Kashmir is much greater than Jammu. So this is the kind of arrangement that they have tried to institute in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, but it has no credibility, no acceptance. All these actions are ipso facto null and void.
All right, Asim Sahab, also all eyes are on the United Nations when it comes to Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. When we talk of this condemnation by the OIC, this subcommittee, that is the IPHRC, has asked the United Nations as well, again, as have other countries, to play their due role, and it talks of three important points: pressurizing India to abide by the relevant United Nations Security Council and OIC resolutions, restore all fundamental freedom to the Kashmiris, and repeal all the discriminatory laws and allow the people of Kashmir to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination. What kind of possibility do you foresee of any one of these points to actually take shape in the future?
IPHRC has a specific mandate. Its work revolves around issues of human rights, and most of its pronouncements are in that direction. And you would have seen this recent one also is focusing on human rights, and they have pronounced on the report of the Delimitation Commission because it is a direct infringement on the fundamental human rights of the Kashmiri people. It is a great blow to the promised right to self-determination of the Kashmiri people that was guaranteed to them by the UN Security Council. Now, the demands that IPHRC statement includes, these are very logical, same kind of demands as Pakistan has been making. The foreign minister, in his recent letter to the president of the UN Security Council and the UN Secretary General, has made the same calls on the Security Council. The Security Council is the primary organ of the UN. It is vested with the responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. And it is in the UN Security Council that the resolutions on Jammu and Kashmir dispute were adopted. And these are the resolutions that contain the principle on the basis of which this dispute has to be resolved. And that is on the basis of self-determination. The Kashmiri people will decide about the accession to India or Pakistan, and that has to be done through a free and impartial plebiscite to be organized under the auspices of the United Nations. So that is very clear, and that is why the call has to go to the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility, and in particular the permanent members of the Security Council to shoulder the responsibility to impress upon India to get the Security Council's own resolutions implemented. This is very important because this has direct implications with the peace and security situation in the region.
Asim Saab, you talked about Pakistan's role. Now, Pakistan has been quite prominent as far as politically, morally and diplomatically supporting the besieged people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Of late also, a démarche was handed over to the Indian Chargé d'Affaires by the Foreign Office as far as the categorical rejection of the Delimitation Commission's report was concerned. And of course, it was also said that the Muslim majority population of the region needs to be empowered and franchised. Pakistan's efforts are being seen by the entire world community. But is India reacting, or will India ever react, in your point of view, to all that Pakistan has been asking and working towards for the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir?
They will have to take into account what is being said not only by Pakistan but by others around the world. You just mentioned yourself the OIC statement. Let me recall that ever since India initiated those actions in August 2019, the OIC on multiple occasions, they have categorically rejected all those actions that India has taken from 5th August 2019 and onwards. So it's a group of countries, 57-member strong bloc that has categorically rejected India's actions in IIOJK. So it is a significant, influential statement from a significant, bloc of the international community. And then, as I said, no country in the world has endorsed or condoned India's actions in Kashmir. And then you would have followed in many countries, from US to the United Kingdom, several countries in Europe, Sweden recently, the European Union itself, and many other countries. In the parliaments, there have been debates about the situation in Kashmir, about the human rights violations, about the threats to peace and security. So people are, aware of what's happening. Some are saying it openly, some are saying it bilaterally, but I think the pressure is building, and there is a lot of naming and shaming, and I think there is a lot of reputational cost also that India has to incur in all of this. And I think the pressure is building, and I think it will keep on building. And then, last but not the least, leave everyone aside. Look at what the people of Kashmir, they themselves are saying. I think it is very evident, very clear that the Kashmiris have outrightly rejected the Indian actions since 5th of August 2019. They are totally dissatisfied, they are totally alienated, and all they want is, uh, you know, going forward, they being enabled to exercise their right to self-determination.
Speaking of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and this is my last question on this topic before I go to another very small topic but very important one on which I'll ask your point of view. When it comes to Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, I'd like a clarified point of view from Pakistan's Foreign Office and Pakistan as well. Is this, as India claims, a unilateral issue, a bilateral issue, or a trilateral issue? Does it involve Pakistan and India? Does it involve Pakistan, India, and the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir? Can we have mediators in order to find some kind of a solution to this issue in the future, like the US had also proposed in the past? What is Pakistan's point of view on this?
Well, our point of view is very clear. Jammu and Kashmir is an internationally recognized dispute. It is a dispute between India and Pakistan. It is on the agenda of the UN Security Council. So it is not merely a bilateral issue. It also involves the Kashmiri people because, as I said, the principle enshrined in the UN Security Council resolutions, the method by which the dispute over Jammu and Kashmir has to be resolved, it revolves around the wishes of the Kashmiri people themselves, the plebiscite. What do they want? They want to accede to India or Pakistan. It is the Kashmiri people themselves who have to decide. That is why Pakistan always says that we need to move forward on the basis of the UN Security Council resolutions and in accordance with the wishes of the Kashmiri people. So our point of view is very clear. This is an internationally recognized dispute. It is on the agenda of the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council resolutions are valid and applicable. They need to be implemented, and the plebiscite needs to take place.
All right. Asim sir, finally, the President of the United Arab Emirates and the ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, has passed away today at the age of 73. I'd like to have Pakistan's Foreign Office's comment on his demise.
This is a very sad news that the government and people of Pakistan have received. Sheikh Khalifa had great contribution to the development of U.A.E. and to the promotion of Pakistan-U.A.E. relations. You would have seen the condolence message from Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. I think in this time of great loss and grief, the entire Pakistani nation conveys their condolences to the brotherly people of the U.A.E.
Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us, to have talked to us about the report of the Delimitation Commission, Pakistan's official stance as far as the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir issue is concerned, and of course Pakistan's efforts in the fight for the right to self-determination for the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and also your comment on the passing away of the ruler of Abu Dhabi. Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us. That was the Foreign Office spokesperson Asim Iftikhar Ahmad Saab talking to us about Pakistan-India relations in the context of the report of the Delimitation Commission, and of course as far as the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir issue is concerned, and how that is important for Pakistan and for any future tangible and concrete relations with India. Let's go to our last two stories. As I've mentioned, and I asked also Asim Iftikhar Saab, my next story concerns the demise of the President of the United Arab Emirates and the ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan. He has passed away and gone to the heavenly abode at the age of 73. The United Arab Emirates has announced a mourning of 40 days to mourn the loss of their ruler. Now, His Highness Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan was, as I said, the President of the United Arab Emirates and the ruler of Abu Dhabi. He was somebody who the people of the U.A.E had very close to their hearts. He was one of the most prominent figures as far as the Arab world or the United Arab Emirates was concerned. He was the eldest son of Sheikh Zayed. He was born in 1948 and was the second president of the United Arab Emirates and the 16th ruler of the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. He has laid down the foundations of a very strong country that is the U.A.E, and to follow in his footsteps will be an arduous, a difficult task, but nevertheless he has laid down the foundations for the others to follow in his footsteps. We will always remember the strong, friendly relations and the friendship that emanated from His Excellency Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan towards Pakistan. We will always cherish the friendship that he has shown towards the Pakistani leadership and the Pakistani people, and we mourn his loss with great fortitude. May Allah bless his soul and may he be given the highest ranks in Jannah. Let's come to now our last story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns Pakistani lawyer and activist Tahira Hassan. Now, Tahira Hassan has received the Commonwealth Points of Lights Award for her efforts to promote the well-being of orphaned, abandoned and stateless children. Now, what is the Points of Light Award? This is an award that is given to the outstanding individual volunteers who are making a positive change in the community. What has Tahira done? She has been a strong supporter of adoption. She specializes in family law and custody cases. She founded the Imkan Welfare Organization way back in 2012, around 10 years back, which now runs a shelter and a recreational center for orphaned and abandoned children in Karachi's Machar Colony, a squatter settlement that is home to around 700,000 people. She has set up a mother and child healthcare center there. She helps in the adoption of orphans and stateless children to reduce both infanticide and child abandonment. She says that her organization Imkan was laid down on the foundation that each and every child not only has a right to live but to thrive. The British High Commissioner, Dr. Christian Turner, on the occasion of course, the award being bestowed on Tahira, said that she is making a big impact on the lives of some of the most vulnerable children in Pakistan. He also said that this recognition of her work is a testimony to the long-standing and deep ties with the United Kingdom, Pakistan, and other Commonwealth countries that they share. We congratulate Tahira on getting this award, and we hope that many others will follow in the same direction to help the destitute, to help the orphans, to help those who are in need in Pakistan. That is what also is one of the pillars of Islam, to help those who are in need in the society. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah on Monday with new stories, segments that pertain to us, you, Pakistan. In the meantime, not only do I wish you a great weekend, but also a safe one. Do follow the SOPs, restrict your movements, especially in crowded places, and if you are going there, do wear your masks. The cases are increasing, but we can together evolve a strategy to reduce the numbers in the days to come. Only that will help Pakistan. With that, we bid you farewell. Allah Hafiz and have a great weekend.